Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to 12th century Korea to a quiet hillside home where a scholar is just beginning his evening routine. You're there too, in spirit of course, walking gently across creaky wooden floors, polished smooth by generations of silk slippers. Outside, a soft, rustling wind passes through bamboo groves. Inside, the paper walls breathe with a sound of quiet, soothing, absolute, and unbothered by the urgency of modern life. The lanterns are already lit, not the blinding kind, but soft oil lamps whose flames flicker like shy dancers. Their glow throws gentle halos across hand-copied scrolls and worn inkstones. You're surrounded by the faint scent of pine smoke, fermented ink, and something vaguely gingery, like someone left a root in a teacup too long. Your host, a mid-level Confucian scholar with precisely 3 government titles and 0 sense of urgency, greets you with a bow. He says nothing, but he doesn't need to. His every movement is practiced deliberate, like each evening is a quiet ceremony. You realize very quickly, this is not the kind of man who misplaces his slippers. You're guided through a series of rooms that each become progressively quieter, as if the architecture itself has volume control. This is a sarang chai, the men's study quarters in a traditional hanok, a wooden home arranged with near symmetrical grace. There's no clutter, no rush, and absolutely no neon green desk chairs. The first thing your host does after sunset is tidy up his scrolls, not because he was messy, perished the thought, but because it's respectful to begin the evening by symbolically clearing the mind. Scrolls are unrolled, brushed gently with the side of a palm, then placed back in their embroidered sleeves, like bedtime for ancient paper. And then comes tea. Not your quick dunk tea bag situation, but a tiny ceremony of heating, pouring, swirling, and breathing in steam before drinking even a drop. You sip slowly. The tea tastes like chrysanthemum rainwater and discipline. It's warm, calming, and somehow manages to make you sit straighter. By the way, historians still argue whether Goryeo-era scholars drank tea for health ritual or sheer aesthetic. Probably all 3. They had a way of turning every daily task into a moral practice. Even pouring water was supposed to reflect your inner balance. And now you spot it, the centerpiece of the room. A low table lovingly rubbed with sesame oil, covered in brushes, with delicate animal hair bristles, cakes of ink that look suspiciously edible, and scrolls covered in characters more beautiful than readable. The scholar sits cross-legged in front of them like a monk about to paint the universe. You're invited to sit too. Cushions are offered. If you're lucky, yours is still warm from the sun earlier that day. If not, well, you pretend not to notice. The floor, after all, has its own charm. Radiant heat from the Andal system. An ancient underfloor heating technique using stone and flues. Yes, even back then, Koreans understood the life-altering joy of warm toes. As your host begins grinding ink In slow circular motions, the room fills with the faint, earthy aroma of pine soot and glue. It's meditative, almost hypnotic. And here's your first real test. Stay awake long enough to appreciate the sound, the rhythmic scrape of stone, the whisper of brush across paper, and the occasional creak of a shoulder too stiff from too many years bent over poetry. You look around. The windows are covered with Hanji traditional paper made from mulberry trees, translucent enough to let in moonlight strong enough to withstand decades of gossip. Outside, you hear the muted thunk of a distant gate being latched. Even the night knows it's time to study. And now the scholar speaks. Not much, just a few words about the day's verse or the quality of the ink. It's not small talk. It's small contemplation. You nod, pretending to understand the philosophical nuance of the phrase, ink flows truest from a still heart. You won't survive this life, by the way, not because it's dangerous, but because your modern attention span wasn't built for this level of calm. A full hour has passed, and your host is still drawing one character. You, meanwhile, are trying not to breathe too loud. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where in the world you're winding down tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes linger on the shape of the scholar's posture, the lean of his back, the way his brush pauses mid-stroke, like it's considering the meaning of life. You don't ask questions. You just watch. Eventually, he rises, places the brush down with almost parental care, and extinguishes one of the lamps, just one. The room dims again, like a stage after a scene. It's time for the next act. Preparation for rest. But don't worry. We're easing into that gently. Section 2. You're still seated on the floor, but the energy in the room has shifted slightly, delicately, like a page turned in a quiet book. Your host stands, straightens his back with a gentle sigh that sounds suspiciously like the universal ache of a man who has spent too many hours hunched over calligraphy and steps toward a lacquered cabinet. You follow with your eyes, slow and unblinking, as the doors creak open. Inside is a meticulously arranged arsenal of tools, not weapons or gadgets, but the sacred trinity of the 12th century scholar, brushes, scrolls, and tea accoutrements. There's also a curious collection of clay jars, each marked with neat calligraphy. You lean in and catch faint whiffs of dried herbs, flower petals, and what you're fairly certain is fermented turnip. Before you can ask, your host selects a thin porcelain cup, taps in a powdered blend, and fills it with steaming water from a carved bamboo thermos. The scent hits you like a hug from an apothecary ginger mugwort and jujube. It's an herbal tonic, supposed to keep the mind clear, the blood balanced, and the chi flowing, though whether it actually works or just tastes confusing is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether these nightly brews were consumed for their medical properties or their ceremonial elegance. One thing's for sure, no one drank them quickly. Every sip was a miniature meditation, every pause between sips a chance to reflect on Confucius's fifth favorite virtue. Your host offers you a cup, and you accept it with both hands, trying to imitate his reverent grip. The cup is warm, smooth, and let's be honest, slightly chipped, which somehow makes it more authentic. You take a cautious sip. It's spicy and earthy, with a hint of this used to be a root. You nod solemnly, as if to say, yes, I too feel more virtuous now. While you sip, he begins laying out scrolls for the night's reading. Not too many, just enough to suggest he has high standards, but healthy boundaries. There's a Confucian classic or two, some poetry, likely written by a friend he met during the royal exams, and a scroll with a strange border of painted frogs. You're told it's a fable, possibly about filial piety, possibly about frogs. It's hard to say. Then come the brushes. They are arranged with the precision of a surgeon's toolkit, small for fine calligraphy, medium for casual strokes, and large for dramatic poetic flair. The brush tips are made from goat hair, rabbit, and even weasel, because apparently nothing says elegance like a rodent-adjacent writing tool. One brush is set aside for you. It's small, tidy, and probably meant for beginners. You reach for it and immediately smudge a bit of ink on your fingers, which earns you a look of quiet amusement from your host. He doesn't say anything, but he does hand you a cloth that's been washed so many times it's more memory than fabric. With scrolls unfurled, you both take a moment to breathe, literally. Breathing was part of the process. Deep, rhythmic, nose-only inhalations that would have made any modern yoga instructor proud. Then slowly, he dips his brush into the ink, swirls it gently, and begins writing. You try to mimic him. You really do. But your first character looks more like a startled centipede than a word. That's okay. The night is long and the pressure is non-existent. You're not here to impress anyone. You're here to sleep through history. Somewhere behind you, a servant glides in silently to refresh the tea water. You don't turn around. That would be uncouth. Plus, you're busy pretending to understand the metaphysical symbolism of bamboo in winter. Quirky tidbit. Here it comes. Some Goryeo-era scholars believe that writing by moonlight imbued your characters with more clarity and peace. And while that sounds poetic, it was probably just an excuse to avoid using too much oil. Practicality wrapped in philosophy. Classic scholar move. Your brush glides again while skitters, and your host nods approvingly at your persistence. He recites a few lines from a well-loved poem, something about a crane flying past a scholar's window and the fleeting nature of inspiration. You try to remember it, but honestly, you're distracted by the scent of the ink and the way the lantern light makes your brush shadow dance on the scroll. There's something else you begin to notice too. The way the silence here is not empty, but full. Full of rustling leaves, distant night birds, and the soft squeak of wood as someone somewhere turns in their sleep. It's the kind of silence you can lean against. Eventually, your host sets down his brush, stretches his fingers with a crack that echoes like thunder in the stillness, and carefully rolls up the scrolls. Not hurried, not lazy, just inevitable. He takes another sip of his herbal blend and raises his cup in your direction. A silent toast to stillness, to ink, to nights where nothing explodes. And just like that, it's time to change into night robes. Yes, even this part is ceremonial. He walks over to a wooden chest and retrieves two neatly folded garments. The fabric rustles like dry leaves as he unfolds one deep blue with a collar stiff enough to correct your posture. He disappears behind a screen and re-emerges in his robe looking exactly as peaceful as before, but now 15% more bedtime ready. He gestures for you to follow suit. You take your own robe. It's lighter, maybe cotton, maybe hemp, definitely scratchy, and fumble your way into it. The sleeves are too long, the tie is confusing, and you're suddenly very aware that you're not from around here. Still you manage. Barefoot and robe-clad, you're now fully inducted into the Scholar's Night, a quiet brotherhood of sleepless thinkers and herbal tea enthusiasts. Your host glances at the moon peeking through the Hanji window, then motions toward the sleeping chamber. You follow your footsteps muffled by the heated floor. The scrolls are tucked away, the brushes cleaned, and the inkstone covered with a silk cloth, as if even tools deserve rest. The room darkens, and you prepare for what's next, the endless debate over mosquito netting. Section 3. You stand at the edge of the sleeping chamber, staring at what appears to be a bed, but not the kind you know. No fluffed pillows, no bouncy mattress, and absolutely no top sheet that disappears in the laundry every 2 weeks. Instead, laid neatly on the Ondal warmed floor is a padded mat, a rolled-up headrest, and hovering above it all the infamous mosquito curtain. Now, in theory, it's a simple decision. The net protects you from bloodthirsty insects. In practice, however, it's a whole thing. Do you tuck it under the mat or let it hang loose like a gossamer tent? Do you allow airflow and risk bites, or seal yourself in like a dumpling and wake up? Sweaty historians still argue whether Goryeo elites truly use them for bugs, or just for privacy symbolism, or a dramatic bedtime flourish. Your host handles it effortlessly. He flicks the net down in one graceful sweep and tucks the sides, just so. No gaps, no drafts, no drama. Then he motions for you to attempt the same with your own setup. You lift the net. It billows like a parachute. You try to anchor one side. The other collapses. Eventually, you wrestle it into submission and pretend it was effortless. Your host nods approvingly, but doesn't hide the faintest smile of amusement. Now that the great netting battle is over, it's time to settle into bed. You lower yourself carefully, because nothing breaks a monk-like atmosphere faster than a knee crack, and lie back onto the firm, surprisingly supportive mat. The pillow, if you can call it that, is cylindrical and stuffed with something suspiciously crunchy. Rice husks, dried beans, the ghost of failed calligraphy exams. You stare up at the soft silhouette of the ceiling beams. There's no ceiling fan, no buzz of electronics, just the creak of the wood adjusting to the cool night air. Outside, the wind stirs again, brushing past the paper screens with the sound of silk sliding across silk. And then, as if summoned by your sleepiness, a servant glides in, carrying a small lacquered tray. On it, 2 sesame cakes, a dish of salted plums, and a tiny bottle of what can only be bakseju, a sweet rice wine infused with ginseng and 9 traditional herbs, according to legend or marketing. Your host waves off the wine politely. He claims it dulls the mind, but helps himself to a plum. You, on the other hand, decide that sleepiness and salted fruit might be the perfect combination. You take a bite of the sesame cake. It's crumbly, just a little sweet, and tastes like something a wise grandmother would give you in exchange for sitting up straight. The Goryeo literati took their nighttime snacks seriously. Not for gluttony, of course, but for balance. The yin of sleep required the yang of a warm stomach, or so they'd claim while sneaking a third cake. Some scholars even had particular snacks based on the season. Ginger rice balls in winter, steamed chestnuts in autumn. It wasn't indulgence. It was philosophy with a chewy center. You chew thoughtfully, while your host leans back against his handrest, murmuring a poem that seems to be about moonlight carp and longing, or possibly indigestion. It's hard to tell with classical metaphors. You offer a soft chuckle, which earns you a raised eyebrow of mild approval. Humor, it seems, is not forbidden, just quietly rationed. The air grows cooler, and the oil lamp is turned down to a low golden glow. The shadows deepen, curling like calligraphy around the edges of the room. And now the conversation slows. No need for filler talk, no social media check-in, no podcast humming in the background, just the light chewing of plum skin and the occasional shifting of silk robes. Then, unexpectedly, your host turns to you and says something in a low, amused voice. Do you know why scholars never write after midnight? You shake your head. He pauses dramatically, then answers, because the brush begins to write what the heart truly thinks. He smiles, half mischievous, half wise. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe that late-night calligraphy could accidentally summon spirits. That's right. Write too late, and your ancestor might drop in with notes on your punctuation. A superstition, sure, but also a pretty solid excuse to stop working and go to bed. You lie back again, full of cake and calm, staring at the weave of the mosquito net above you. It's like a dreamy filter over reality, softening the lines and nudging your brain toward sleep. You hear the gentle clink of the tray being taken away and the soft thud of a door sliding closed. It's just you and the night now. A breeze wafts through a tiny opening in the wall. It's cool, fragrant, with pine and earth, and carries the faintest hint of something else. Ink, old books, distant incense. You can't place it, but it makes you feel like a guest in a place that values stillness over spectacle. In this room, in this century, there are no clocks ticking, no emails pinging, no glow of LED lights. Just warm stone under your back, a belly full of poetry and snacks, and a gentle scholar humming quietly to himself. You yawn, and your host yawns too. It's contagious even across centuries. A mutual agreement forms. It's time to let the night take over. He says one final thing, barely louder than a whisper. Dream lightly, but take good notes. And with that, the room returns to silence, except for your thoughts, which now begin to slow stretch and wander. Section 4. You're not sure how long you've been lying there, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 100 years. Time feels less like a measurement and more like warm mist drifting around your thoughts. The room is still, but your mind hasn't quite shut off yet. It's bouncing gently between memories, metaphors, and is that your foot poking out from under the mat? You tuck it back in and stare at the ceiling again, counting wooden beams as if they're sheep. 1, 2. Wait, was that beam split slightly? Probably intentional. Everything in this room seems chosen, shaped, and softened by purpose. And then, from the room next door, you hear it voices. Not loud, not urgent. Just two men speaking softly as if words themselves might wake someone. You lift your head, curious. The voices grow clearer, a conversation, maybe even a debate, conducted with the kind of calm that suggests both participants are too dignified for raised voices and too well-fed for anger. This, you quickly realize, is not gossip. This is inkstone conversation, the after-dark pastime of scholarly minds. It's not about winning, it's about dwelling. Each idea is turned over like a smooth river stone, admired from every angle, and then gently passed along. Your host, still wide awake, and now leaning on one elbow, like a man with opinions, to share calls softly through the doorway. Friend Yoon, he says, what was that line about the peach blossoms and duty? A second voice responds, it was not peach blossoms, it was plum. Plum is for resilience. Peach is too decorative. A soft chuckle. Yes, yes, plum. My mistake. The two men fall into a rhythm of metaphor swapping so dense, you're not sure whether they're talking about love virtue or government bureaucracy. Possibly all three. You listen, hypnotized, as phrases like the moon's patience and the bamboo's regret float through the paper walls like incense smoke. Historians still argue whether these late-night exchanges were rehearsed performance or spontaneous brilliance. Some claim they were ego contests in disguise. Others say it was simply how scholars unwound the way modern folks might binge a historical drama and whisper commentary between episodes. You wish you could contribute, but honestly you're struggling to remember the Korean word for plum, let alone its metaphorical implications. So you settle for listening, nodding, occasionally, to no one in particular, and committing phrases to memory, like the silence of a well-tuned zither and rain that writes on stone. Suddenly, a scroll is pushed under the sliding door, apparently passed from the other room. Your host picks it up with reverence, unrolls it, and reads aloud a short 4-line poem. It rhymes. Probably. You catch the gist. It's about aging nostalgia and the futility of trying to dry laundry in the rainy season. Your host sighs with appreciation and mutters, "Not bad, but he always overuses rain." You lie back again, watching as the moonlight creeps further into the room, casting gentle lines of silver across the floor. The voices in the other room quiet for a while, and you're left once again with the soft rhythm of night sounds. And speaking of sounds, have you noticed the subtle symphony outside crickets, always on rhythm? A distant owl doing a solo, the occasional wind chime from a neighbor's porch completely out of tune, but trying its best. Even the wind has a voice here, not howling or roaring, but sighing like a poet whose muse just left for tea. The Goryeo Scholars' Evening isn't one of forced silence. It's full of soft activity, layered quiet, never rushed. The kind of life where even a whisper carries the weight of intention. You can't help but wonder if you've ever listened this closely to your own thoughts. But let's be clear, these scholars weren't all as serene as they looked. They were human. They grumbled about their students, worried about their reputations, secretly preferred short poems over long essays, quirky tidbit. Some of them wrote sarcastic notes in the margins of ancient manuscripts. One even doodled tiny turtles to mark where a text was particularly slow. Your host picks up his own brush again, not to write, but to twirl it between his fingers, absent-mindedly. It's an unconscious movement, like a fidget spinner for the refined soul. He turns to you and says, "Do you think heaven listens more closely at night?" You shrug. It's not the kind of question with a right answer. Instead, you ask a question of your own. What happens if you fall asleep mid-poem? He smiles. Then the poem finishes itself. In dreams. That's good, that's really good. You almost sit up to write it down, but stop yourself. That would be a very unscholarly thing to do. Better to let it drift like everything else tonight. You roll to one side pillow, crunching gently under your ear, and pull the light blanket up to your shoulders. The brush twirling stops. The voices in the other room have faded again, and the moonlight. It's almost reached your fingertips now, trailing along your sleeve like a final stroke of the brush. You blink once, then twice. Your eyelids grow heavier than the scrolls you unrolled earlier. Somewhere out there, another scholar is probably still up composing a verse about koi fish and taxes. But you're ready to let go for now. And just before sleep takes you, Your host whispers a single line. Only a quiet mind can hear the ink speak. And then, stillness. Section 5. The night deepens. Time no longer marches. It meanders. The lanterns have been dimmed so low, their glow is more suggestion than illumination. Your eyes flutter open for a moment, then drift closed again, caught between the folds of sleep and still wakeful comfort. And just when you think you've reached the edge of slumber, a low creak announces the arrival of a very specific problem: temperature control. You shift under the blanket. One foot gets too warm, the other too cold. You shuffle again and realize something is off. Ah, yes, the Confucian sleep schedule. Unlike your modern collapse, when exhausted routine, the Goryeo scholar adheres to an ancient, deliberate model of rest, based on cycles of the moon, digestion, and somehow virtue. That's right, even sleep was a moral act. Your host, still seated upright on his mat, with monk-like posture, watches the moon's position through a paper-thin slit in the screen. It's the hour of the ox, he says quietly. Time to close the heart and still the tongue. You nod sleepily, which is scholar speak for what does that even mean? According to tradition, the night is divided into 5 watches, each with its own personality, recommended behavior, and optimal posture. This hour, the deepest one before dawn, is for quiet reflection, not snoring, not dreaming of dumplings, but simply being present in one's moral stillness. Historians still argue whether this nightly segmentation was widely practiced or mostly aspirational. There's evidence in court diaries and private letters, sure, but also plenty of jokes from scholars about oversleeping and missing the first watch entirely. Your host begins to lie down, his movements slow, reverent, like he's bowing to the night itself. He tucks the mosquito net with the same precision as folding a royal decree. His arms cross over his chest, and his breathing becomes the rhythm of a mountain lake. You try to mimic him. Lie flat. Let your hands rest softly on your belly. Breathe from your diaphragm. Avoid any dramatic rolling or arm flinging. You're supposed to release attachments at this hour, which is hard because your nose itches. Still, you persist. You close your eyes. Focus on the sounds. The brush of wind through distant cypress trees, the occasional clack of bamboo in the courtyard, and a night bird that seems to be philosophizing in short, confused bursts. A thought wanders in how many scholars have stared at this same ceiling over the centuries. How many dreamed of passing their royal exams while lying on the same kind of mat, hoping their calligraphy wasn't too showy. How many lay awake worrying about using the wrong metaphor for loyalty. You shift slightly, careful not to betray your supposed virtue, and notice something strange. A faint tapping sound. Not regular enough to be a clock, those don't exist here, but rhythmic. You strain your ears. It's your host, gently tapping a wooden bead in his hand. A subtle meditation trick, helps align breath and thought. also keeps him from falling asleep with his eyes open, which, let's be honest, is an impressive risk at this point. Quirky tidbit. Some Goryeo scholars trained themselves to nap with awareness. They called it Myeongjong, a kind of lucid half-sleep where the body rests, but the mind floats gently above, alert and philosophical. You're just trying not to drool. Eventually, your host opens one eye and says softly, "The best dreams come to those who aren't chasing them." Then he closes both eyes and finally allows himself to sink into true sleep. You follow suit. The mat is firmer than you're used to, but the warmth from the ondol floor radiates up into your bones like a gentle reminder that yes, you are in the right place, and yes, you can let go now. You pull the blanket higher, tuck your hand under your cheek, and let the scholar's quiet rhythm lull you toward the edge of sleep. But just before you cross over, you remember something else he said earlier, that heaven listens more closely at night. So you think very softly, a single wish, that peace like this finds you again. And then, finally, you sleep. Section 6. You wake not with a jolt, but with a drift. Like a paper boat coming gently to shore. The room hasn't changed, still dim, still warm, but something in the air has shifted. Your host is already stirring his silhouette, outlined faintly behind the screen. It's still night, or maybe very early morning. The sky outside is more ink than light, and the oil lamp has burned down to its last whisper of flame. You lie still for a moment, trying to decide whether you dreamed at all. There are no clocks here, no phone buzzing with weather updates or reminders to hydrate. Just your breath, the slow shift of your blanket, and is that the sound of chewing? Yes, chewing. You sit up slightly, robe askew, hair a quiet disaster, and peer across the room. Your host is sitting cross-legged again at his low table, calmly nibbling something from a ceramic dish. He glances at you, nods politely, and gestures for you to come closer. You shuffle over, not quite fully awake, and join him in front of the tray. This is not a full breakfast. This is what you might call the midnight snack of the literati. It consists of exactly 3 items: a slice of steamed sweet potato, still warm, a dish of preserved jujubes, and a small bowl of sticky rice porridge, lightly salted. Beside the tray sits a cup of barley tea, pale and aromatic. It smells faintly of toasted grains and patience. You're invited to try a bit. The sweet potato tastes like earth and kindness. The jujube is a chewy burst of concentrated autumn. The porridge, well, it's humble, but it grounds you like an edible lullaby. Your host eats in silence, pausing occasionally to sip his tea and gaze at the moon, which now hovers low over the mountain ridge like a shy guest who overstayed dinner. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars swore by jujubes as a mental tonic, claiming they could soothe the spleen and clarify the heart. Others simply liked the texture. Historians still argue whether the midnight snack was a regular part of scholar life or a luxury reserved for exam season and emotional poetry binges. You finish your bite of sweet potato and look around. The tray, The lamp, the hand-polished floor, none of it is extravagant, but every piece feels like it belongs. That's the heart of this world, not luxury, but harmony. Your host leans back and stretches his arms, joints cracking in quiet protest. Then he says, almost offhandedly, "Food at night reminds the mind that the body must also be fed." You nod solemnly, mouth full of sticky rice. And just as you're thinking this might be the final calm before morning, a knock barely audible comes from outside. Another scholar arrives. He enters with quiet bows and a small scroll tucked into his sleeve. His eyes are puffy, his robe slightly wrinkled. You immediately recognize the signs. This is a man who couldn't sleep and thought, why not deliver a metaphor at 3 a.m.? They greet each other in the way scholars do. No words, just a slow mutual glance and one shared sip of tea. The scroll is unrolled. It's a new poem, or perhaps a riddle. Something about cranes and mountain fog. The handwriting is impeccable, which is either impressive or worrying given the hour. The three of you sit for a while, reading, sipping, contemplating in different directions. You don't speak. You don't need to. The poetry does the talking. Then, without much ceremony, the visiting scholar stands, bows again, and leaves. No one chases him down for a selfie or follows him on anything. He simply disappears into the night, as scholars tend to do. The room is still again. You lie back down this time without a fuss and pull the blanket over your shoulder. The tray of midnight snacks is left where it is. That's part of the ritual too. A reminder that nourishment happens at all hours, and so does thought. Outside, a breeze picks up. A few scattered leaves tap against the screen. It sounds like applause, but soft and far away. Maybe the trees like the poem. You breathe deeply. The scent of barley tea lingers faintly in the air. Your host is already lying down. Again, his form barely visible behind the soft drape of the mosquito curtain. You whisper a single thought. I'm not even mad. I woke up for this. And just like that, your eyelids begin to grow heavy once more. The silence isn't empty. It's full of what was just shared. Not a performance, not a lesson, just a moment. Warm, poetic, and a little chewy. Section 7. Sometime later, though, you couldn't say how much you awaken to a gentle scraping sound. Not harsh, not insistent, just deliberate, like someone coaxing the universe to reveal something, one soft brush stroke at a time. You sit up slowly, limbs reluctant, but not resistant, and look toward the low table again. Your host is there once more, in his thinking pose, spine straight, legs tucked, brush in hand. But he's not writing anything formal this time. No essays, no scrolls, just a blank sheet of rice paper and a small worn inkstone carved with the shapes of clouds curling over mountains. He's grinding ink again. The circular motion is almost hypnotic, stone against stone, water turning soot into thought. It's a form of meditation, a slow rhythmic act with no goal except the doing of it. He dips the brush, lifts it, pauses, then writes a single character, waits, then another. You join him again, cross-legged and cautious, hoping not to ruin the calm with your clumsy modern aura. He gestures for you to try. A fresh sheet is placed before you. The brush is lighter than it looks, like a whisper in your hand. You hesitate. He nods. Just breathe. Then move. So you do, one awkward, trembly stroke at a time. Your first attempt looks like a startled duck. Your second, perhaps a regretful cloud. But by the third, something happens. The rhythm finds you, and for a moment your brush moves with the quiet confidence of someone who's not trying to be perfect, just present. Historians still debate whether calligraphy in the Goryeo period was meant as art discipline or spiritual exercise. Most agree it was all three. Scholars believed a person's brush strokes reflected their character. Steady ink, steady heart. Shaky ink. Well, you were probably stressed about exams. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars kept ugly character journals, private scrolls where they deliberately wrote with their non-dominant hand to practice humility. Supposedly, one even used his foot. The point wasn't beauty, it was sincerity. Something about letting the ego bow before the ink. Your host continues, now lost in his own rhythm. His characters are long confident, a little bit wistful. You lean over and try to read one. It means stillness, another patience. The third wind. He chuckles gently. It's a poem, he says, about inkstones. I've been working on it for 5 years. You blink. 5 years. For 4 lines. But then again, nothing here is rushed. Not tea, not poems, not sleep. Outside dawn is still some ways off, but the night has softened. The stars are fewer, the wind less bold. Crickets still sing, but in quieter voices, like they too are tiring. You glance down at your own calligraphy. It's uneven, wobbly, absolutely unpublishable. But you don't mind, because something in the process made your breathing slower, your chest lighter, your thoughts less tangled. Your host places his brush down and carefully wipes his hands with a cloth. He nods at you, not for your skill, but for your effort, for showing up to the page. That's what mattered. There's a moment of shared silence, one that doesn't beg to be filled. You both sit listening, breathing, letting ink dry on the paper and sleep rise again behind your eyes. And then he speaks just above a whisper. The inkstone remembers. Even what we forget. You don't ask what he means. You don't need to. The night is teaching its own lessons now, each one gentler than the last. So you lie back down this time, with your hand still stained faintly by the brush. You decide not to wash it off just yet. A quiet souvenir. The mat welcomes you. The net hangs softly above. Your heartbeat has slowed to match the rhythm of the inkstone. And as your eyes begin to close again, you think, if I ever return to this century, I hope it's through ink and silence. Outside, the wind makes one final pass through the bamboo grove. Not hurried, not final, just enough. Section 8. You awaken once more, though this time it feels less like waking and more like surfacing. The air in the room has shifted again. There's a subtle hum, a stillness that feels less nocturnal and more transitional, like the pause between the final note of a lullaby and the first whisper of dawn. But sleep still very much on the table. Your host, however, is sitting upright again. You're beginning to suspect he's part owl. This time, he's not writing, not drinking tea, not even reading. He's just sitting, eyes closed, breathing so evenly, he might as well be a mountain with excellent posture. You sit up too slowly, groggily, and he notices. With a slight smile, he gestures toward the window, which now glows faintly with a whisper of lavender light. Dawn is approaching, and with dawn comes the final task in this long, unhurried evening, aligning sleep with Confucian principle. You're not making this up. There's a documented belief that the way one sleeps, when one sleeps, and even how one wakes up could either elevate or betray one's moral character. The Confucian sleep schedule was rooted in the idea that rest should serve the mind, not the other way around. Sleep wasn't indulgence. It was maintenance, like polishing a jade pendant or trimming a bonsai. Useful, respectable, ideally symmetrical. Historians still argue whether most people actually lived like this, or whether it was just the scholar class trying to impress their ancestors. But one thing is clear: waking up without flailing, groaning, or cursing was very on brand. Your host rises with all the drama of a cloud drifting past a window. He folds his blanket into a perfect rectangle and tucks it under the sleeping mat. You attempt the same. Your fold is less perfect. He doesn't say anything, but his eyebrow raises just a hair. You've been judged. Gently. Now time to prepare for the next step in this scholar's morning ritual, bathing. But before we go there, he pauses. Still seated, he reaches for a small lacquered box from under the low table. It clicks open to reveal a tiny scroll, a checklist of sorts. Morning reminders, daily intentions, and right there, at the top, still the mind before moving the limbs. You try this. Eyes closed, spine straight, breathing slow. It works for about 6 seconds before your knee starts to itch and your brain begins drafting a grocery list. But hey, it's a start. Then he stands and walks to the wall where a simple bronze mirror hangs beside a wooden rack holding folded garments. He unties the sash of his night robe with the elegance of someone who's definitely done this 20,000 times before, and exchanges it for a pale linen garment, his morning robe, crisp and scentless. As you follow his lead, you notice how every layer of clothing here serves a purpose. The outer robe is for appearance, the inner one for purity, the sash for restraint. Even the sleeves seem to hold moral symbolism, generous flowing, yet not flashy, like the personality of an ideal civil servant, now fully dressed. Your host bows not to you but to the corner of the room where a small ancestral tablet rests on a shelf, a quiet ritual, a nod to those who came before. You bow too, a half second behind, not perfectly synchronized, but respectable. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believed that if you didn't bow to your ancestors before sunrise, they'd spend the rest of the day slightly disappointed in you. Not furious, just vaguely unimpressed. You both sit again, facing the window. The moon is gone now, faded into the soft lilac sky. A bird chirps, just one, testing the air, seeing if it's safe to begin. Your host reaches once more for the barley tea, now cooled to a pleasant room temperature, and takes a long, slow sip. You do the same. The taste is subtler now, less toasted, more reflective. And just when you think he might start reciting something, he instead hums. Just a note or two, not a song, not a chant, more like a memory of one. And then, he says, the heart that rests at night must walk lightly during the day. You're not sure what it means, but you nod like it changed your life. The room is quiet again, but the silence is shifting. No longer the hush of ink and sleep, but the breath before beginning silence of a new day. You roll your shoulders, adjust your robe, take one last sip of tea, and glance at your host, who is now smiling faintly as if to say, yes, now comes the bath. And yes, it will involve spring water and probably goosebumps. But for now, the quiet still lingers. You let it. Section 9. It begins with a thump, not loud but noticeable, the kind of soft, low noise that seems to echo more in a silent room than it deserves to. Your eyes dart toward the door. Your host pauses, head slightly tilted, brush still in hand. There it is again, a soft, muted thud, followed by the gentle click of wood shifting outside. You blink. Your host doesn't react with alarm, just a calm, observant stillness. He sets down his brush folds, his hands in his lap, and says almost too casually, "The wind," or something older. Great. That's reassuring. You lie back down even though every muscle in your body has become a small antenna of awareness. The creak of a door, a faint rustling in the garden. The moonlight flickers through the lattice. And then, silence. Now you're not the superstitious type. You don't believe in ghosts. Usually. But when you're in a 12th century scholar's house, made of wood shadows and paper, and your host refers to the older things that walk the night, you become extremely open-minded. Because here's the thing, Goryeo-era Korea was steeped in spirit beliefs. Despite the dominance of Confucianism, shamanic traditions still pulsed beneath the surface. Spirits of the house, ghosts of ancestors, mischievous woodland creatures, the full paranormal buffet. Historians still argue Whether these beliefs were truly respected by the literati or quietly tolerated, like that one uncle who talks to plants. But plenty of records suggest that even the most rational scholars would on occasion leave out bowls of rice for something they claimed didn't exist. Your host rises silently and lights a fresh stick of incense, not for ambiance, for warding. The smoke curls upward like a question. You watch him trace a small symbol with his fingers above the incense holder. It's not in any of the Confucian texts you've seen, probably not approved by the Ministry of Rites. Sometimes the past remembers itself. He murmurs. You nod, slowly, carefully, like someone who has no interest in meeting anyone's ghost grandmother tonight. He gestures for you to sit again, this time closer to the window. Outside, the bamboo garden sways faintly. The moonlight casts strange shapes. One looks like a hunched figure, another like a bird with a thousand feathers. Probably just your imagination. Probably. But your host, he's relaxed again, as if this too is part of the routine. And now, as if to distract you, or perhaps calm the air, he begins to tell a story. Not loudly, just enough for your ears. A scholar's tale. There was once a young man, he says, who studied so hard for the royal exams that he forgot to sleep, forgot to eat, forgot even to breathe properly. On the eve of the test, he went to bed for the first time in 3 days, and in his dream, an old woman came to him and offered him a scroll. You lean forward, drawn in, despite yourself. He accepted the scroll, but it was blank. Why is there nothing written? He asked, and she said, because all your thoughts are borrowed. He pauses, lets the silence stretch. The incense smoke drifts sideways, as if pulled by memory. The next day, he failed the exam your host finishes, but later he became a poet, a real one. The room exhales again. The wind outside has quieted. The soft thudding doesn't return. And whether it was a ghost, a cat, or the settling of old wood, you realize it no longer matters. You feel safe again. Not because nothing strange is out there, but because everything strange has its place. Quirky tidbit. In Goryeo households, some rooms were deliberately left empty for spirits to pass through. Blocking their path with furniture was considered bad luck, and occasionally someone might wake up to find a scroll moved or a brush gone slightly askew. Most would blame the wind. A few would bow politely toward the empty space. Your host kneels once more beside the incense and breathes in gently. Even the unseen deserves its path, he says. You lie back down, your eyes now half closed, your limbs softened by story. The garden rustles once more, but it's a friendly rustle this time, like a curtain swaying, not a warning, whispered. And just before sleep comes, for you again, you whisper one line to yourself. All your thoughts are borrowed. And somehow you feel a little more like yourself. Section 10. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake up mid-dream with the faint image of a moonlit scroll and a very judgmental crane fading from your mind. Your body is still, but your eyes open slowly, catching the soft light of dawn, beginning to stretch across the paper walls. The incense from before has long since burned out, leaving only the faintest trace of sandalwood and memory. Your host isn't in the room, but his presence still lingers like a brushstroke that continues past the edge of the paper. You sit up slowly, no rush, no alarms. The mosquito netting has tangled slightly at your feet like a sleepy veil, reluctant to let go. You shift your legs out from under the blanket and touch the floor, still warm from the ondol, comforting as ever. Then you spot it, a new scroll, unrolled and weighted down neatly on the low table. Your name isn't on it. You don't have one here, but you can tell it was meant for you. It's blank, or so you think until you notice the faintest lines beginning to appear as the morning light hits the paper. Not ink, not paint, just water. A message written with such delicacy that only the sun could reveal it. You lean closer. The characters are simple, even childish. Probably a poem. You can't read it perfectly, but you recognize one word clearly: quiet. Just then, your host returns, carrying a shallow bowl of water and a towel freshly folded. His sleeves are rolled up slightly and a few droplets glisten along his forearm. Time to wake the face, he says. And so begins your first introduction to the ceremony of morning calligraphy cleansing, also known as washing your face with intention. It's not just splashing cold water to look less puffy. No. This is a deliberate act rooted in symbolism and ancient skincare wisdom. He offers the bowl and you accept it with both hands, kneeling before the table like a guest before an altar. You dip the towel, wring it carefully, and press it to your cheeks. The water is cold, not unpleasantly so, but enough to remind you that you are in fact still alive and very much in a room without central heating. Your host watches you with amusement. Spring water, he explains, collected just before sunrise. It wakes the spirit better than tea. He might be right. You're more alert now than you've been in hours. Historians still argue whether these face-washing rituals were personal habits or part of broader social codes. Some accounts describe scholars doing it 3 times a day each with different intentions. Morning for clarity, afternoon for humility, evening for letting go. You take a second pass with the towel, this time over your neck and temples. The cold bites at first, but then soothes like a brisk walk after rain. You feel refreshed, if slightly damp, and underqualified to participate in a society this graceful. Your host cleanses his face next. But even this is elegant. No splashing, no towel dropped on the floor. Just soft, precise movements, as if he's polishing not just skin, but mindset. Quirky tidbit bamboo towels were sometimes infused with ground green tea or powdered ginseng. Supposedly, this kept the skin clear and the soul balanced. You're pretty sure this one is just plain cotton, but you convince yourself it's spiritually exfoliating anyway. After drying off, your host refolds the towel and places it back in a lacquered box. everything in this world returns to its place. Even the water is poured out in a corner of the garden with a soft blessing to return what was borrowed. You step outside for the first time since you arrived. The air hits different, clean, crisp, and filled with the soft chatter of birds negotiating branch space. The garden is minimal, but intentional. A few flowering shrubs, a mossy stone path, and a tiny pond, so still it reflects your face more honestly than any mirror ever could. There's a stone bench beside the pond. Your host takes a seat, motioning for you to do the same. The cold seeps through the robe and into your bones, but not unpleasantly. It's grounding. A reminder that the night is truly over. And then, without a word, he begins tracing characters into the air with his finger. Invisible writing. You copy him. It's strangely satisfying. Each stroke has a rhythm, a breath, a beat. No ink, no page, just presence. You pause between characters. He nods. Even invisible words leave impressions. You sit in silence a while longer, letting the garden wake up around you. Cicadas begin their morning songs. A squirrel makes a mad dash up a pine trunk and immediately regrets the decision. The wind rustles the bamboo softly, like a page being turned. Your host stands and stretches his back, giving a small series of dignified pops. Breakfast will wait, he says. But the scroll never does. You both turn back toward the house, feet silent on the stone path. The room still smells faintly of tea and sleep. The scroll remains on the table, faded now, the words vanishing back into invisibility. But you don't need them anymore. You carry them with you. Section 11. Back inside, the morning light filters softly through the Hanji paper windows, turning the room into a delicate watercolor. Shadows blur, edges melt. It's no longer quite night, but not yet fully day. A perfect in-between where everything moves a little slower, like even the air is stretching after a long nap. You return to your sleeping mat and begin the quiet process of folding your blanket. It resists in a friendly, slightly crumpled way. Eventually, it obeys. You smooth it down and realize your pillow is not just a pillow. It's a statement piece. It's made of bamboo, hollow, cylindrical, and somehow both too hard and too light. It smells faintly of lemongrass and academic ambition. Your neck isn't sore, but it's definitely more aware of itself than usual. The pillow of bamboo and regret, your host says with a chuckle, noticing your cautious side-eye toward the object. A scholar's first test of humility. You pick it up, turn it in your hands. It creaks slightly like it's judging your posture retroactively. You ask him tentatively why anyone would willingly sleep on something that feels like a polite punishment. He smiles. Comfort dulls the will. The pillow reminds us to rise early, think clearly, and never oversleep by mistake. Historians still argue whether these hard pillows were genuinely common or more of an upper-class affectation, like owning 7 types of ink brushes or casually referencing Song Dynasty poets in breakfast conversation. But there are records. Bamboo pillows were prized for their cooling properties in summer, their clean smell, and their supposed ability to guide dreams toward clarity. Some even had carved grooves that mimicked acupuncture points. You don't know about clarity, but your dream last night did involve arguing with a ghost over correct comma placement. Your host begins neatly placing the sleeping mats away into a chest. There's a routine to it, like closing a book you plan to reread tomorrow. He handles the blanket with care, but no ceremony. This isn't performance. It's simply how one respects the tools of rest. You follow his lead, rolling your mat, tucking the edges, like folding a letter you'll send to your future self. The bamboo pillow gets its own spot in a wooden box lined with paper. It's given a respectful nod, possibly out of fear. Then comes robe changing again. You're beginning to see that clothing here is less about fashion and more like punctuation. Each robe marks a different rhythm of the day. Today's robe is crisp, pale, and made of rami, a plant-based fabric that somehow manages to be breathable, wrinkle-resistant, and slightly smug about it. Your host shows you how to fold it just so over the chest and tie it at the waist in a way that says, yes, I am ready to reflect deeply on things today. Quirky tidbit. Scholars often embroidered tiny personal symbols onto the inside collars of their robes, never visible in public, but serving as quiet reminders of their goals. A pine tree for endurance, a crane for elegance. One famous poet even stitched a tiny brush to remind himself to keep writing. You sneak a glance at your host's collar, but see only smooth fabric. Whatever his symbol is, it's for him alone. Now dressed, you both sit again at the table this time for what your host calls scroll winding. Yes, the same scrolls you used last night. They were never formally closed, and to begin a new day without properly rewinding your thoughts, unthinkable. He starts with a small one, his friend's frog-riddled fable. He places 2 fingers on one end and begins rolling slowly, carefully, pressing out any creases as he moves. It's hypnotic, like watching someone wind a river back into its spring. You're handed your scroll, the one you clumsily practiced characters on. It's drier now, less smudgy. The characters still look like drunk spiders, but they're your spiders. You start to roll, not as gracefully, but with equal care. You're told to breathe evenly while winding. Somehow it helps. When all the scrolls are back in their sleeves, they're returned to the cabinet one by one, like old friends being tucked into bed after a long journey. Your host pauses by the door and gestures toward the window. The sun is now fully risen, spilling golden light into the garden. Cicadas have begun their morning chorus, and somewhere nearby, a rooster lets out a cry, so proud it clearly thinks it invented mornings. You follow him to the edge of the veranda. The bamboo pillow, the scrolls, the inkstone, they're all packed away. But their presence lingers. Like footprints in soft earth, they've marked you. You feel different, not dramatically, not with fireworks, but gently shifted, like a cup filled to the brim with calm. And just before your host steps down into the garden path, he says without looking back, "May your regrets be soft, like bamboo in spring." You almost laugh, but then realize he's completely serious. Section 12. Despite the morning light, despite the folded robes and rewound scrolls, you're not quite ready to rejoin the waking world. Not yet. And it seems your host isn't either. He returns to the room holding a small wooden tray and sets it down without ceremony. On it are 3 items: a charcoal ink brush, a folded paper fan, and a small sealed envelope tied with red string. He sits down cross-legged again and motions for you to join him, a slight smile playing at the edge of his mouth. "A test," he says, "but not the kind with right answers." You blink. "A test. Now." He gently places the brush on the fan and nudges the envelope toward you. Before the royal exams, it was said that one must answer 3 questions. One from the heart, one from history, and one from silence. You stare at the envelope. It doesn't exactly scream mid-morning pop quiz. Your host adds, "We don't open the envelope. We just write as if we already know what's inside." You nod slowly. This sounds suspiciously like dream logic, but also poetic. Of course, scholars would invent an exam with no prompt and no grade, probably just to confuse younger students. You lift the brush, dip it lightly into the last of the ink, and take a deep breath. The paper fan flutters slightly in the breeze from the open window. Then, carefully, hesitantly, you begin to write. What? It doesn't matter. Your mind drifts to the night just past, the bamboo pillow, the incense smoke, the conversation through walls. You let your hand move. The brush leaves uneven strokes, wobbly at first, then steadying. You don't worry about beauty or clarity. You write because, well, that's the test. Your host watches, saying nothing. Historians still debate whether these pre-exam rituals were common among Goryeo scholars or simply the stuff of later romanticized poetry. But multiple sources reference nights before the state exams, filled not with cramming, but with reflection questions that couldn't be memorized, only understood slowly, over tea, over time, and sometimes over dreams. You finish your writing, though you're not sure if it's a letter, a poem, or a confession. You lay the brush down. Your host picks up the envelope and, without untying it, places it carefully into a small lacquered box. It will answer itself in time, he says. Some letters are written only for the future version of ourselves. Quirky tidbit. A few preserved scholar envelopes from this period have been found unopened, intentionally sealed forever. When one was finally studied under soft light, no peeling allowed. The ink was barely legible, but formed the phrase, "For the me who dared." You sit in silence, breathing a little deeper than before. And then your host stands and gestures toward the doorway. You follow him out into the courtyard where the world has fully awakened. The sky is bright now. The trees cast long shadows, and the birds are no longer tentative. They're downright chatty. You pass a small cluster of rocks, arranged with such precision they might as well have been playing chess all night. A few flower petals rest atop them, left by the wind or perhaps by your host, who seems like the type to quietly scatter beauty where no one's looking. The path leads to a small wooden gazebo, nestled beside a still pond. You sit again, facing the water. The surface is mirror smooth, reflecting the garden's soft geometry and your own sleep-creased reflection. Your host breaks the silence. Did you dream, he asks. You think. The crane, the blank scroll, the faint sound of brushing ink. You nod. He smiles. Then the night worked. He unrolls a fresh scroll and begins drawing again, not writing but sketching this time. Shapes appear. Mountains, clouds, a tiny figure walking alone under a pine. The brush strokes are minimal, suggestive, like a dream retold in fragments. You watch, not needing to speak. Each motion is an invitation to stillness. And in that moment, surrounded by wind, by pond, by the echo of bamboo clacks in the distance, you realize that this entire night, this long, quiet, strangely poetic night, has been its own kind of scroll, a slow unfurling of peace, not to be analyzed, not even fully remembered, just experienced. The sketch is finished. He holds it up to the sun and watches it dry. Then he offers it to you. For your wall, he says. Or for your memory, if you have no wall. You take it with both hands, humbled. And as you walk back into the house for one final cup of tea, you wonder, what if modern life included just one morning like this? Just once. How different might your regrets feel? How many noisy thoughts might grow quieter? You sit at the low table again. There is no pressure, no to-do list, just the faint taste of ink on your fingers and the echo of a question you didn't need to answer. Section 13. You linger over your final cup of tea. It's different from the one you had last night, lighter, almost grassy, with a crisp aftertaste that reminds you of early spring and pages turning. Your host sits across from you, not speaking, only watching the steam rise and vanish. There's no urgency in the air, no signal that things are ending, just the quiet sense that one rhythm is giving way to another. Outside, the day has begun in earnest. The birds have organized themselves into some kind of avian debate society. The wind chimes are a bit more ambitious now, chiming confidently with each gust. Somewhere in the distance, a servant's footsteps echo down a stone path, quick, rhythmic, full of daylight energy. But here, in this small scholar's residence, the tempo remains the same, slow, deliberate, and pleasingly indifferent to the rest of the world. Then Your host clears his throat, a soft, non-committal sound like a comma. It is time, he says, to listen. You blink, to what he gestures toward the open window, to the descent. Ah, of course. What better way to start the morning than by eavesdropping on philosophical disagreement? He leads you outside and around the back of the house where a small covered walkway connects to another scholar's quarters. The wood creaks slightly underfoot, but nothing about the sound feels unwelcome. It just adds another layer to the atmosphere, like harmony in a choir. As you approach, you begin to hear the voices. Two men speaking calmly, rhythmically, with occasional pauses so long you wonder if they've dozed off mid-thought. They're debating something. The tone is gentle, like two owls discussing the ethics of nighttime hunting. Your host leans against a post and listens, nodding faintly at certain phrases. You try to follow along. It seems they're talking about the ethics of filial piety versus civic duty. Heavy stuff for someone still half-dressed in metaphor. The men use analogies so intricate it takes you a minute to realize one of them has compared royal advisors to a flock of geese. The lead goose must know when to glide and when to fall back, says one voice. But the wing beat must never waver. Your host chuckles softly. Minister Hahn again, he whispers, always with the bird. Historians still argue whether Goryeo intellectual debates were genuinely widespread or largely limited to circles of the privileged. But records do exist of nighttime discussions written on the backs of receipts, letters, even pressed leaves. Sometimes dissent had to hide in metaphors just to stay alive. One of the voices inside pauses, then offers a line that lands with a peculiar weight. The loudest loyalty is often the most afraid. Your host closes his eyes as if tucking that line into the shelves of his mind for later. And then the cicadas begin. You hadn't noticed them until now, but suddenly they're everywhere. A soft crescendo like rain on a paper roof. Not overwhelming, just enough to be present. Quirky tidbit Goryeo scholars often composed poems about insects not out of admiration, but because they considered bugs to be model citizens of silence and persistence. Cicadas in particular were praised for knowing when to sing and when to wait. There's even a poem where a scholar apologizes to a cricket for stepping on its brother mid-thought. Your host gestures for you to follow him back through the garden where the sun now dapples the stone path like spilled gold leaf. As you walk, he recites a line from memory. In the hum of insects, even kings grow quiet. You don't reply. You don't need to. Back at the main hall, he removes his outer robe, folds it, and sets it aside. A signal that this part of the day, the contemplative listening part, is drawing to a close. He sits again at the low table, pours a final serving of barley tea, and pushes a cup toward you. Tea, he says, for not saying the thing you wanted to say. You accept it with both hands. Drink slowly. Let the silence resume. The scrolls are away. The brushes are clean. The inkstone is dry. But the debate, gentle rustling metaphor-laced, is still out there, drifting across gardens, courtyards, and centuries. And you've heard it. You've lived it. Not just the stillness of the night, but the quiet courage of respectful disagreement. You lean back against the wall, your robe soft around your shoulders, your tea cooling in your hands. No one wins the argument. That's not the point. The point is that it was spoken at all, and spoken gently in the presence of listening. Section 14. You don't even realize how far the sun has risen until its reflection catches on the lacquered edge of the scroll cabinet. Morning, full and golden, is spilling gently into every corner of the house. Shadows, once long and secretive, are now brief and unafraid. Your host stands and stretches, not with a groan or sigh, but like a pine tree adjusting to sunlight. His movements are fluid, practiced. You sense it's time for the last ritual before the day officially begins. He gestures to follow him down a narrow stone path toward a quiet alcove behind the house. There, nestled in a cradle of moss and ferns, is a low stone basin carved directly from the earth. Water ripples gently inside, fed from a trickling bamboo spout. A small pile of folded cloths rests nearby. No soap, no fuss, just a bowl of spring cold water and the sky overhead. Bathing it turns out is less about hygiene and more about presence. And today it's done under the gentle glow of morning light. Your host kneels beside the basin, dips one cloth, and wrings it slowly. He begins wiping his face, then his arms, then without urgency, his hands, as if removing the final traces of sleep and ink. You kneel too, copying him in rhythm, if not grace. The water is cold, sharply, blessedly cold. It bites your skin and wakes every pore. Your breath catches, but you welcome it. The temperature has a way of peeling off the fog of the past few hours, not harshly, but with a quiet insistence that says, you are still here. Historians still argue whether morning baths in the Goryeo period were meant for physical refreshment or spiritual reset. Given the absence of soap and the presence of birdsong, you suspect it was a bit of both. You wipe your neck, your arms, your face. The chill lingers in your fingers. It's a reminder that not all calm is warm. Sometimes it's clarity that cools you down. Quirky tidbit. It was common practice for Goryeo scholars to write a single sentence with their finger in water on a stone after bathing. The sentence would vanish in seconds, but the meaning stayed. Truth briefly held, they said. Your host does exactly this now, kneeling before a flat rock and writing 3 swift characters that begin to fade even before he stands. You do the same. What you write, that's between you and the stone. As the water evaporates, your host unfolds a clean cloth and begins drying the basin's edge. Not because it's required, but because it's respectful. This space, like every other one in this home, is part of a larger dialogue with the day, and it deserves to be acknowledged. He stands and gestures toward a nearby bench, half in shade, half in sun. You sit together, both robes damp at the edges, the scent of cold water and green leaves fresh in the air. For a while, there's no talking, just breathing, just listening. The wind rustles through the trees above, shaking loose a few petals that drift down like hesitant dancers. One lands near your foot. You leave it there. Then, almost casually, your host asks, "What do you miss from the world you came from?" It catches you off guard. You pause, think, then answer not with a list of technology or comfort, but with something simpler. Noise, you say. Sometimes. The kind that makes you forget to think. He smiles. We have that too. It just comes in the form of overconfident roosters. As if on cue, the rooster calls out again from somewhere nearby, full of pride, slightly off-key. You both chuckle, and in that shared laugh the final traces of night seem to dissolve. What remains is not the scholarly rigor or the elegance of the robes, but the ease of two humans just being wrapped in routine, framed by wood and stone, and held gently by the rhythm of a culture that believed in listening more than declaring. Your host rises, brushing a leaf from his sleeve. "Come," he says. "The tea is ready." And just like that, the ritual of night gives way to the ritual of day. The cold bath becomes a memory. The stone sentence already vanished. But in your chest, a steadiness remains. You follow him back inside, steps lighter now, as though the water has made your limbs more air than weight. The scrolls await. So does breakfast, but you're in no rush. This, after all, is a place where time waits politely at the door until invited in. Section 15. The house is fully awake now, though it never announces it with clangs or chaos. It simply becomes day, quietly, with the soft clink of ceramic cups and the distant sound of a broom being swept across stone. You return to the main room, and there it is, a fresh tray on the low table, carrying the first true breakfast of the day. It's humble, but lovingly arranged. Warm rice, steamed greens with sesame oil, a dish of pickled radish, and a small bowl of dried anchovies with just enough sweetness to remind you they're not angry about being eaten. At the center of it all is tea. Again, yes, always tea. This time brewed from roasted barley and pine needle tips, earthy and fragrant, like drinking a forest that gently forgives your mistakes. Your host motions for you to sit. You do this time more easily, more like someone who knows where their knees are supposed to go in a Hanok house. The two of you begin to eat slowly. There's no talking, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. The food is simple but sacred, not because it's blessed, but because it was made without hurry. You take a bite of the radish. It's tangy, bright, and just shy of crunchy. A perfect wake-up. The rice is warm, a little sticky, and tastes faintly of wood smoke. The anchovies are tiny, slightly crisp, and taste of oceans and patience. Each dish does its part. No drama, no showboating. Historians still argue whether the Goryeo scholars' breakfast followed strict routines or varied depending on status. But many records agree on the tone modest, seasonal, and eaten with intention. No shoveling, no reading while chewing, just eating like it matters. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars swore that the way you finished your rice bowl said everything about your personality. Leave a grain behind. You were careless. Clean it too obsessively. You were vain. The ideal scholar, calm, precise, and never crunched the anchovies. You finish your meal in quiet harmony with the house itself. Even the breeze that passes through the window seems to wait politely between your bites. Then comes the final step in this night to morning transformation, the rewinding of the scrolls. But not just the paper ones, the mental scrolls, the night's reflections, dreams, unspoken thoughts. Your host brings out 2 fresh sheets of paper and offers you one. A writing brush is already waiting, newly cleaned bristles, soft as a sigh. He says nothing. You know what to do. And so you write, not as performance, not as poetry, just a memory, a line, maybe a question, something to mark the space this night has carved into your thoughts. Your brush moves more smoothly now, not because your skill has improved dramatically, but because you're no longer trying so hard. You're letting the ink do what it wants, letting the moment write itself. When you finish, you set the brush down gently, bow slightly toward the paper, and fold it without reading it again. Your host does the same. Neither of you exchanges what was written. That's not the point. The act is enough. The ritual completes the circle. And now at last you rise. The sun has fully claimed the garden. Shadows stretch in the opposite direction. The world is ready for schedules, errands, loud voices, and complex politics. But for this moment, you're still outside of all that, hovering just a few inches above time. Your host walks you to the edge of the gate. Beyond it, the road curves gently down into the waking world. You bow. He bows. Not deep, just enough to say, "This mattered." And then, as you turn to go, he calls out one last time. Return when your thoughts grow loud. You smile. You will. And though the ink will fade, the paper crinkle, and the bamboo pillow return to its corner, something about this quiet night, this gentle cascade from study to tea to dream today will stay, not as a quote or a scroll or a neat historical fact, but as a rhythm, a way of breathing, a piece you now carry tucked neatly inside. And now, just let yourself float for a moment. No scrolls to wind, no robes to fold, no metaphors to decode. Just the softness of your breath, the hush of morning's edge, and the sense that somewhere tucked into a green hillside, a scholar is still grinding ink, whispering verses to the moon, and placing warm tea beside an empty mat. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let your thoughts scatter like leaves on a still pond. You've spent the night moving through ancient routines where every action was a kind of poetry, every silence a gentle stanza. And now you don't need to remember it all. You only need to feel how still you've become. The garden fades. The paper doors dissolve. Even the bamboo pillow releases its grip on your spine. All that remains is warmth, a slow breath, the hum of peace rising like steam from morning tea. If sleep hasn't found you yet, it will soon. It's waiting just past the next breath. So rest now. You've traveled centuries without leaving your room. You've written words with your hand and your heart. And in the quiet folds of this long, still night, you've become part of something older than noise. Close your eyes. Let the scholar's home drift behind you and carry that calm with you all the way to sleep.